My grandfather used to have a particularly weird saying he would often quote whenever I was growing up. He would say that whenever he passes away, he wants his body to be thrown in a hole on his cow pasture so that he can continue feeding his cows after he's gone. Of course, my 6 year old self didn't know whether this was just a really bad joke or if you could actually come back from the dead just to feed your cows. Recently, I discovered that this could be an option for him in ways that I had never imagined. Death is something that, whether we like it or not, we have all been impacted by. Whether it's your family members or a friend's, knowing the options that we all have makes the experience a little less scary. This is something that we have to face, and knowing what choices you can make for your burial lets you take control back in one of the most inevitable events of your life. I have more knowledge on this subject than your average 20 something year old because I began working in a funeral home whenever I turned 18. I was hired to do the hair and makeup of the deceased, but I left with an inside, up close and personal look of death and the funeral industry, and I'm here today to share that knowledge with you. Firstly, we can look at the history of burial in America, and secondly, we can look at what traditional burial is. And finally, we'll jump into the question of what is green burial. Now, I know a lot of you might not be able to picture what funerals looked like before modern day burial. Historically, burial of the dead has been practiced since about 130,000 years ago. According to Joshua J. Marks' article, Burial in the World Encyclopedia of History, burying of the dead first started with the Neanderthals, and it was thought to have started because of the belief of life after death. Native American burial practices often include wrapping the bodies of the dead in blankets and providing them with tools for the journey through the afterlife. When the Pilgrims settled in the United States, their burial practices changed a lot from what they were used to in England. This was mostly due to winter weather conditions, which had frozen the ground and made being outside for long periods unbearable. This meant no final service. Headstones or coffins were able to be used as part of the ceremonies. The Civil War brought about many changes for burial practices in America with the growing popularity of new technologies. A new practice became popular called embalming. This practice of preserving a deceased body allowed for bodies to be transported long distances with minimal decay. According to the Golden Charter in their article, A Brief History of Coffins, the Civil War was the first time coffins gained massive popularity for transporting the dead. The first majorly publicized embalming was of none other than the United States of America's 16th president. In Patricia Hartley's article, Abraham Lincoln, the president who made embalming great again, she states that the president's body was loaded onto a train and passed through 180 cities and 7 states for the American people to pay their final respects, and this was all thanks to embalming. Now that you're more familiar with what burial looked like in the past, let's talk about the burial practices of today. Traditional or full-service burials, as they are sometimes referred to, are what most of us Americans are accustomed to seeing or hearing about when a loved one dies. According to the Funeral Consumers Alliance, traditional burials use the funeral home services, embalming the deceased, and burying them in a casket or a vault in a public cemetery. This type of burial is the costliest option, averaging between $7,000 and $12,000. Aside from traditional burial practices, another popular option is cremation. This involves the remains of a person being turned into ashes and most time being buried or sealed in an urn and placed for display above ground. This option is more cost efficient than a full body burial, ranging from $6,000 to $7,000. Cremation prices can vary depending on whether the deceased families opt to have a service or what the body will be cremated in. In most cases, a cremation without a burial can save a family over half the cost of a full body entombment. However, there are other burial options out there if traditional burial is not your style. Green burial is becoming a more popular new type of burial in the United States. Sonia Vitomsky's article, Thinking About Having a Green Funeral, Here's What You Need to Know, describes a green burial as foregoing embalming, skipping concrete vaults, rethinking burial containers, and maintaining and protecting natural habitats. While most people see green burial of placing a corpse in shrouds or biodegradable caskets as a modern concept, it sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? That's right, green burial has been around for a very long time and focuses on using death to help the environment. Green burial is termed as such for multiple reasons. Green burial allows for decomposition to happen naturally, and your body could be used to help the plants around you grow and be nourished. This means my grandpa's wish of being able to feed his cows after he dies could become a reality. This option can also save you green. According to Robert Schroeder's article, Why More Americans Are Considering Green Funerals, this option is on an average of $2,000 to $3,000. This option is a third of traditional burial cost and half of cremation cost. Today, only 5 to 7% of burials are considered green, but 72% of cemeteries are reporting an increased demand for green burial services. In review of all we've discussed, today I've highlighted the history of burial in America, what traditional burial is, and what makes a green burial. Again, this is something that we must face, and knowing what options you have for your burial lets you take control back of the most inevitable event in your life. Your death is an experience that you can plan and be prepared for to make it easier. It does not matter what option you choose, but your burial choices are in your hands. No matter what option you choose, your death is one of your biggest choices in life. So what will you choose?